Nested loops. We're going to wrap up the Design Patterns Explained second edition book and talk a little bit about new topics that we might try to do. So I'll turn it over to Andrew. It's great.
All right. Hey guys. Let me share my screen. Right. So I read Summary of Factories, and I had put into practice Summary of Factories earlier this month, which was pretty cool. It's the first time I started just factories in general. So I was pretty stoked to use it. Sorry, I lost my screen. Here it goes. This all around. All right. What I thought was really nifty about factories in general was the amount of abstraction that I can use, and just taking something that's really complicated, which would have required a lot of spaghetti code to accomplish, and instead create a really nice descriptive class and methods that I was then able to just put into one factory and would call those classes. And that kind of highlights refactoring in general. The idea with refactoring is that there's smelly code, or in the sense that there's a code smell, meaning that code is doing something that goes against some of the principles that we were learning, like dry, or the whole solid framework, I guess, would be the way we found it, just solid. And if it violates it, there's like some methods that you can use. I think going on forward, that book on refactoring would be great. Kind of just takes everything that we've been learning and, you know, using some like concrete examples of those. Another thing to go with my story of having used factories. Oh, sorry. Was that Boris?
I didn't say anything, so.
Oh, okay, sorry. So another thing with using factories is that I was able to handle a lot more, a wider scope in my requirements. So if I hadn't, I would have given up on the code base altogether. So factories was one of the most useful patterns that I've learned here on design patterns. The whole abstracting, trying to figure out what's the same amongst all these objects, and then kind of like, how would I want to call them? I wouldn't have done it like without that in any way. So that was Summary of Factories. More or less was just my anecdotal experiences with factories. I didn't really know much, like how much to say without like restating the section.
So after you've learned to do, or had some, like you look back and it's actually pretty simple, but it wasn't obvious. And I think some people, if you just tried to explain this and go, oh, but isn't that just, and like it's almost like it's too simple to actually use. Does that make sense? People go, oh, really? Do I need to even do that? But I think you found it was useful anyways.
Yeah. What's nice about it was that, for those who are not aware, our boss, I don't know if I can use her name, so I'm just not going to say her name. So our boss would ask me, like, 6 weeks into the project, she's like, "So you're doing a lot of work. Is this going to be easy to maintain?" And I was confident in saying that, yeah, um, these classes that I made that are handled by the factory are easy to update, and they're very um, isolated from one another, and it would be quite straightforward that if something changed, that I'll be on top of it and be able to change it without having to like worry about how. And I'm going to segue into one more thing: how how to make sure nothing gets affected by it. And then to segue is that in making the factories, I made 2 factories for this one program. I found it really easy to create tests because it was really simple for me to say, okay, what does this object do? Okay, it does that. All right. And so it was really easy to set up tests for like these use cases, that is handled by the factory without having to like run the entire um, program and say, okay, after if I do this and like set up all the states correctly, then I should get this. And then repeat that again and again in the tests. The tests were really simple and easy to write. Um, that was another thing to just say is that having the test makes it easier to track that if I do change something, that it still kind of uh, reacts or behaves in the way that I expect it to. And factors was just like a door, like a like a doorway for me to walk through with my code. Um, so let's just do a review. I'm just going to read straight from the bullet points sometimes. So overall, we learned, I guess, different levels of learning design patterns as to like why and how design patterns came about, certain principles that we've learned that generated design patterns. There's a common theme, one of them being commonality and variability. Um, Responsibility, making sure that there's some sort of isolation, and then designing to interfaces. Those are main topics. Uh, I do hope to read that one book by Christopher Alexander on architecture, so I should get that soon. Hopefully, be able to read through it before you guys come to Stanford. We would love to talk to Scott and try to understand how he understood the book. So now a summary of objects. Objects have responsibilities, have certain behaviors that respond to certain messages. That's your encapsulation, what encapsulation means. And then here's the designing to interfaces. Decoupling different responsibilities from others. I think there's also the idea is that no one object has to do too much, or that it shouldn't need to do what another object can do. That kind of just helps in saying, oh, I have this one object that does this set of tasks. Like, it could be useful to have it do something else, but it might be a better pattern to just say, no, you know what, I'll just have another object that's kind of related, but it's not, I don't want it to do and know too much. There's something about that where everything's very modular. I design patterns, calculations, for commonality, variability analysis. To me, the one that speaks out most to me is the decomposing the problem domain into responsibilities. The whole takeaway for me is that if you have something and can define it by responsibilities, it becomes easier to talk to the scope of the project. If you have something that you're just saying, well, what would be the the opposite of that. Was, I guess, just hacking it together. I'm not sure how I would define it without saying it now responsibility. I can't not see it being done without these responsibilities. Otherwise, it's just one big object that does too much and knows too much, and it becomes harder to maintain. As well with responsibilities, an interface is kind of like a concrete implementation of a responsibility, where you define how an object interacts with the world outside of it and what it allows other objects or other processes to know of it. The interfaces provide that sort of barrier between what is and what isn't its responsibility. It's funny when he says that patterns aren't really the important thing. Kind of like the whole book's about patterns, and then at the end it's just like, well, yeah, no, it's not. But in a sense, it's like picking up on that overall idea of how you want to, or what you're trying to achieve with patterns. Patterns practically are like a language that I can now use with Forrest and say, hey, Forrest, what do you think of this factory that I want to implement? That's now like a language, but now I think what he's trying to push here is that there's something beyond the patterns. There's this kind of idea of like, what can I do that's in that kind of stream of creating objects that will make this easier to maintain in the future. Because patterns really provide a way to say, yes, things are fluid, they're never set in stone, and we need to have some process and that we can work with this moving target that never settles down. So I feel like that. I love that he always uses Alexander's book, because that's really something that I've been wanting to read now since I think in one presentation I took some snippets of the book, and it was just like they were kind of like little mysteries to like try to decipher. Hopefully it'll make more sense once I read it. Let's see. Adam describes users Okay, that's an interesting it's like a figure of him trying to explain what goes into a design pattern. The terminology aspect of design patterns is really useful. Design patterns as a whole I can't say anything else beyond that. Well, if design patterns promote test-driven development, then test-driven development also promotes agile programming. So logically, then design patterns promotes agile programming. I say if design patterns make it easier to test and to test often, then essentially we're doing agile programming, where we're making sure that as we're building, we're ensuring that what we build is of quality, but also we can do it in a quick manner that we can work on in the future if we need to. Thinking more pragmatic.
That's kind of a big leap, but okay.
So, implementations, commonalities. So he leaves us with these few questions that, while we code, try to, guide us in that how to use design patterns. What implementations would this pattern hide? What are the commonalities in this pattern? What are the responsibilities of the objects? What are the relationships between the objects? I can't. How may the pattern itself be a microcosmic example of designing by context? Microcosmic example. So is he saying like as a seed, uh, kind of like
It's, it's it's just he's saying a design pattern is a small microcosmic, a small example of design by context. It's
oh,
kind of like TDD is basically a microcosm of extreme programming because it's iterative. It's a small example of something where you red green refactor, you get it, you have something, you solve it, you make it better. Repeat, right? That small cycle, a microcosm, that's extreme programming. You plan a sprint, you do it, you see where you are, you re-steer, you fix old stuff. It's microcosm. It's always an example of it. So
okay. So it's designed by context that it's the overall overarching feature of what design patterns can create. This like maybe I can rephrase that. So design patterns is like part of the bigger designing by context. I guess I'm stuck on design by context. Is that something like new or?
designing by context. So he talked about several parts of the book of what is the context within which your context matters. There's no like the opposite of design by context. A lot of times people want to do right. If we look at and Agile's a broad term. If we look at extreme programming or BDD, you get these big, and I guess I will gesture. You get ideally in the big picture, you go to your stakeholder, you find out what's most important, what's most risky, or if we're going to go lean, what's the MVP? What are the things you need to focus on? And then you grab something, you decide to build something. Then we kind of make a vertical slice. Hey, so to use Ruby tech we have, you might get with the stakeholder, write a cucumber, like a primary cucumber, and the cucumber from there. This is the context with which you might TDD the rest of the solution. If you're doing extreme programming, right? And there's a context. Oh, I'm going to do this one vertical slice. What is often taught in software engineering, computer scientists, oh, I've got this thing, so I'm going to build the database layer, I'm going to build the API layer, I'm going to build all this layer, a horizontal thing. And if you know what's going on, that's a better scope. Or if you're writing a library, something general like a library, general purpose use, you kind of have to think a little more general. But over time we found that approaches like extreme programming where you make this vertical slice where everything built is related. Customer says, hey, for a bank account, I want to be able to open a new checking account with the so-and-so thing. Everything, there's a context for everything, right? So in the macrocosm of things, designed by context, BDD is like, hey, I've got this scenario and now I got 3 classes and I TDD only the functionality for that one. And so it's well known what the context is, and that shapes your design. If you just say, hey, I'm just going to make banking stuff for everybody, and then I have to build all these layers and make this super generic thing. And again, that approach is still applicable for people who make library, like Boost. It's the big C++ thing, super generic. There are some things that fit that mold, but I think most software does not do well to be super generic because you have a lot of stuff that doesn't apply or wasn't well designed or wasn't good fit for you. That's why people keep rewriting software, because this thing they found on the shelf doesn't work for them, right? So context matters. So that's the macrocosm. So the microcosm here is a design pattern, is a small part of designing by context, because it is the context that shapes this. When he talks about what are the responsibilities, or his previous picture, what are the forces and the relationships around you? And more importantly, what is your problem and what are you solving, or what are you giving up to solve this? This context is all important in what you do. So that being said, I kind of, as I look at this summary, and I remember from ages ago, from the first edition, which I still feel is a way better way to teach a better way to teach design patterns. Design patterns were really, my recollection of the first book is he took a bunch of design patterns and said, hey, let's look at these things. How do we separate what changes from what doesn't change? You know, and the commonality variability is part of this. What is the same? What is different? Take what's the same and put it one place. Take the part that changes a lot and isolate that from the rest of the thing. And there was a couple other principles, probably, you know, design to interface and some other things where he looked at each pattern and then he said, look, this is how this pattern implements those ideas of design patterns. And between that book and refactoring patterns and some other pattern stuff we studied, I kind of got to understand how patterns worked in general. At which point he was saying earlier, it's not the pattern matter. If you understand how to balance these forces, then you don't actually need the patterns. But most people, when they're first learning, they don't. They need something concrete to grab on, and you know, and to right wrong to work out the exercise. So it's like I look at this summary, I go, oh, I swear the old version was way better at this one. And I think when I listen to you recap what stuck on this, I go, oh, I think he failed at the goal that I wanted, which was for you to better understand how design patterns worked. And yeah, I don't know. I'm almost going to have to reread the old book just to make sure I think I'm right on what I thought it was. But anyways, sorry about that. Sorry about that big discussion. But ultimately, patterns are, you go back to Gang of Four original book, which is very textbooky, but it has that thing like, you know, what is the problem? Who are the actors? What is the solution? That's the context. Hey, I've got these, and I need to do this, but I can't do that. This is a solution that fits this. So it is really about the relationships and trade-off that you make to solve certain problems. But what I thought the value of the first edition of this book was, hey, let me grab, I don't know, it wasn't all 24, and it might have included one or two that weren't in the original. It's like, hey, this is how these 12 apply these basic principles, design patterns to solve these particular contexts. And it was from that I was kind of, oh, I get how these work. So now I don't need to follow the example, or I can probably piece together the pattern from what I know, what kinds of things I know you should be doing. That was kind of my desire when I suggested the book that didn't quite come to fruition because he changed. And of course, he had his own perspective from consulting and teaching people. So when he rewrote it, I guess he felt this better, like figure out what patterns you need to apply seemed to be a better thing for him, which I kind of, I don't know. I didn't feel that was something that fit in a topic explained. I said it's a beginner book, and I felt that approach being not quite the right approach. And I don't know if your summary of that sort of verifies that thought, or you know. Okay, we'll go back to this one. In 3 sentences, what is the value of design patterns to you?
My first sentence, the value of design patterns allows a terse language that I can communicate higher level, what's the word for it?
Concept.
Code refactoring concepts. If that was a better word, so higher level concepts. It provides me that kind of like common ground with others that now I can say, hey, I can look at this code and say, you might want to try to use this pattern. My second sentence would be, simplifying my personal responsibility in managing the objects that I create. My third sentence.
Oh, by the way, it's okay if you don't have 3, or if you
okay, good. I have 2 sentences.
or if you 5 points, whatever the points are, just kind
of. Those 2 are my personal
And I think that's valuable. One, having a shared language is great. And they always make, there's all kinds of analogies, like a dovetail joint. It's great for one carpenter to tell them, hey, just make a dovetail joint. Instead of saying, oh, that's the kind of joint where you cut it like this, shape like this. And then when you fit it in, it's like, oh, instead of those 5 sentences, I just say dovetail joint. So having a common language, and this is kind of what I sort of always want on the team. It's like, hey, I can say in 2 words something that's, a page or a chapter worth of material, and you can just go from that. So language is good. The benefit of and this is the management reason that design patterns became so popular after the Gang of 4 book, is managers said, oh my God, here are rubber stamp solutions. Well, they're not quite rubber stamp solutions, but they are solutions that work for the context they're in. And the whole explosion of design patterns into the Java world directly correlates from people going, oh, look at this great stuff, and then rubber stamping them everywhere, which was a little bit of a mistake. But you only learn after you write a lot and you realize what good patterns and bad patterns are. So yes, I'd say those 2 are immensely useful. Having a language and having solutions that work, assuming that you pick the right one and you don't use them. In those observation questions he has here, shielding implementations from what? Give examples. Second one, decomposing. So a lot of his stuff about decomposing responsibilities in my mind felt like just 00101, which maybe isn't actually taught at the 101 level, or what I consider 101 is 201 or something like that. Like a lot of stuff he says, like, oh, that just makes sense, but it's a long thing. The bottom is what 5 forces concepts you look for. So where I think he's pointing to in those observations is more of like, if you understand how these work. So one thing says shielding implementations from. So everything really you want to boil down to is about managing complexity. Stream programming is about managing complexity. Picking what to make and making sure you're going to run. TDD is about managing complexity. It's about, but at the code level of, what lines of code am I going to write after I've specified the behavior, right? And then refactor. Everything in Agile from the engineering perspective, even the managing, is about managing complexity. There's various techniques, but if you look at, oh, what is this one? So this idea of separating what changes and doesn't change. Well, if this doesn't change, we slide it over here, it's safe. And this stuff that changes a lot, then we have to wrap it. That's question 1. How do we shield implementation from? We wrap the variability with an interface that hopefully doesn't change, so that all the code that calls us doesn't have to change, and we isolate it to one place, right? If you look back at all the patterns, a lot of it, we move this chaos that's interspersed everywhere into one place, which, a lot of those are just basic OO stuff. Like if you replace conditionals with subclassing, instead of if, you just unify the interface, you call this one class, and then you move that class over here. So now all the stuff is here, and there's no ifs in the calling classes, and that's basic OO, but that's also reflected in a lot of design patterns there, right? Isolating what changes a lot from what doesn't change a lot. That alone explains a lot of things. And when you talk about the factory, part of that isolation is moving that stuff to one place. And some of the patterns will give you a suggestion of where a good place for that one place is. So you can see in the bridge is a complicated 2 things where boom and boom, and you kind of moved it. Instead of scattered everywhere, it's more here. In some cases, like factory, well, I took these stuff that was if, and instead I just make one factory which spits out an object, and we all use the common interface, right? So that's what I was hoping for this course. I don't know if anyone actually got that out of it. And again, I feel halfway in the book I go, oh, we should have done the first edition, except I don't know if we could find the first edition. So okay, what else is on this page? Sorry to value of hiding implementations. Well, now let's move to one place, and code cutting call isn't affected by change, right? And so concept right? Final stage pattern. Yeah, I kind of say that patterns are no longer important. Receptive to what is real. I'd say that's true if you understand how they work, what is real, and the relationships. Yeah, how the relationships are really. getting a feel of what the relationships are and how you handle them is kind of like so. For me, both of those last two questions, I just kind of nod. Yep, yep, I get it. So I kind of want to throw it out to anyone else. Did any of this happen for you in the context of going through the book? Anyone?
Without without much detail, yeah.
Okay, so yes. All right. I mean, we went to the book. All right. And anything else you want to say, Andrew?
No. As far as how I saw it, I feel like design patterns is not just like an article, like a blog post to read on. It's more like a subject matter to just kind of study up on. There's different ways of applying design patterns. There's more opinions on design patterns. So I was thinking I'll still look at design patterns. I'll look for people's opinion and expression of design patterns. So this is just like a first step towards understanding design patterns in my opinion.
Well, I think that puts you ahead of a lot of people, having done lots and lots of interviews. I think most people go, oh, design pattern. This is this buzzword I know of, and I've seen a couple sentences, so therefore I know something about design patterns. It's like, no, there's, bookshelves of books on stuff. There's so much knowledge. That's kind of the whole point of that, I think, the study group. There's so much knowledge out there. You don't have to reinvent stuff. You just pay attention. You can learn a lot from smart guys that made all the mistakes you're making now already, and you can just step on those shoulders of those giants. There's just so much available. But I think the first thing is knowing the depth that's there. It's sort of like, again, I look at this, the revision of this, I go, I don't think this is the right, this is no longer the appropriate beginner's book of this is how these things work anymore. Him trying to reach higher, I think he kind of muddled that original purpose for the original book, I thought. Okay.
Should we look at the bibliography of like the different sources, or might be?
Oh yeah, I didn't even.
Maybe we might get some.
COBOL. Once you see COBOL, I'm already afraid.
Yeah. I guess he's trying to reach out to the COBOL programmers.
Nothing wrong with that. Again, when you're a book writer, you got to have to reach the largest, whatever, audience.
Yeah, you can't discriminate against them.
Books are in Java, because even if you don't speak Java, even though C or JavaScript or C++, you can still basically read it.
Yeah. I went to this website. I then left the website. It's like signing up for his programs. Or like, oh, you can hire him as a consultant to teach at your company. Stuff like that. Not really like a blog post kind of site. Let's see. Recommended readings. UML by Martin Fowler.
UML distilled. Yeah, that's Martin as a software development. That's a great book. That's the one I said I loaned out the second book there.
Oh yeah.
That's a book. Well, the title lies because it's really extreme programming by Uncle Bob. And it's worth us perhaps exploring. People love to say, and again, having interviewed a zillion people have this notion of agile is this kind of thing that I don't do. Like I don't write big docs and I don't do big design. It's like, no, there are entire methodologies with bookshelves of books on. And so that talks about agile, but his bias is clear. He prefers extreme programming, as do I. It's not surprising that flaccid Scrum is a term in wide use in the agile community for years now to describe how Scrum is what you do when you actually Ron Jeffrey said the Scrum is what you do when you don't have the balls to do extreme programming. Okay, yeah, that's largely true. It is largely true. People go with Scrum because it's the easiest. Object-oriented construction. Bertrand Meyer. Never read that book, but it gets universal description. And design by contract. That's his coining. And the language Eiffel is sort of support that. Design patterns, timeless building, core J2E program that scares me, multi-paradigm, design for Copian. Copian actually contributed to certain design patterns, or his ideas did. Filed Patterns of Enterprise Architecture. It's a thick book, but very influential, especially for us guys, because DHH basically read it and then took 2 or 3 patterns out of it and built Rails from it. So then you got the Gang of 4 book, you got this cognitive patterns, stuff about it, you get a workbook. And again, these workbook books are good to actually do the exercise and actually understand better than academic. Another thing about that, people think, oh, I read this, I can do it. So no, you got to write a bunch of bad patterns before you realize what a good pattern is.
Is that something that would be good for us to like have some sort of workbook? Like we do like a set of...
Let's talk about that after we wrap this up about forward patterns there. So database, yeah, I think ready this, but I don't. Java programmers, Bruce Eckel, he's written some good books. Java's not core Java. Oh, no. I heard that one. Effective Java Programming by Josh Block. Joshua Block, that's supposedly pretty good. I've heard that one. Alan Holden. Alan Holden used to be a big C++ guy, I thought. Java comparison, Java stuff. C++, recycles in another book. All right. Advanced Programming in the Unix Environment. That's a good book if you want to learn Unix system programming stuff.
Oh, this one?
Yeah. That's just Unix. They go that good. That, if I recall right, that has some good stuff. Way low level than pretty much but anything besides I think Diego and I have seen on this team. Koval, it's like, oh, I can't speak anything to that because I know nothing. Oh, looky there. Even though this is, I don't know if you read this before the second edition came out. Kent Beck, XP10 says 2000. I'm looking here at a PDF I have that says 1999. Because I think this is actually the one I have. I believe I got this from the Extreme Programming Google group. Kent Beck put it out there to be proofread. But I have the paper edition one. That's a book I would suggest because it's only 124 pages, and like every Kent book, it's very dense as far as the goal value towards. Coburn's book, we studied that one's okay. If you want to know about Scrum, yes, Regular Beetle. That's pretty much the book I see being used. Pragmatic Programmer, we talked about. That's a good book. They're remaking it. We should consider doing the new one because parts of the old one are out of date from what I can recall. That one's got some extension grow rich, some non-blue. That's some interesting books.
That's it.
All right, very good. Thank you for covering the tail end. So let's talk about forward direction. So we've had some discussion offline about new direction, about doing less of from the book directly. So I think we're going to take a shot at more presentation reforming and possibly move into a book faster. And some of these books that get suggested are like gargantuanly huge. So kind of neat. Otherwise, we'd have per semi, I think an only semi-joking comment of a 4-year study group on the second edition of this book,
Compilers.
which, by the way, I don't know if you can read the little label there.
$43. The coupe.
Yeah, the coup. So, which Don is saying is at least $91.
And it's $91 9 years ago.
9
Now
years.
it's almost $200 now.
Yeah. So, that being said, I think maybe a short book would be good. I threw some suggestions in the Slack that there's some UX books that I thought might be good because I think they're absorbable, and then Alexis could join. But if we're to talk about short books, most of the Beck books are fairly short and they're deep. If we want to look more in process, I would really recommend Extreme Programming 1.0, the 1.0 version. As my big summary is 1.0 came out, everyone goes, "Oh my God, this is so tough," and they were right because Kent Beck, after 5 years of consulting, decided this is really tough for people. So he wrote the second edition, which some people called the kinder, gentler XP. So I go, oh, we should always refer to the first one to see what he kind of made it less hard from. But both have value. But the good thing is they're short. This is that Extreme Programming Explained just had me like nod in my head the whole time, but that's me. So it speaks to me. I don't know if it speaks to everyone. That's a short book. Diego suggested implementation pattern, which is more code heavy. So the Extreme Programming is more about the practices, the 12 practices, how they work, how they interact, and then him having a lot of insight on people, but not really a lot of code, much more about process and how to be correctly agile. Implementation patterns, obviously a lot of code, and us being a Ruby shop, per Diego's suggestion, we should probably rewrite all those examples in Ruby. Would be a good exercise for the presenters. That's something we could do. Mythical Man Month, which gets said a lot, but it basically, I don't know, it's more of a managerial thing. If anyone's bringing, what was I saying? I thought maybe design of everyday things. That's kind of one. Lean UX, 100 things designers need to know about people. Oh, don't make me think, Steve Krug. So I think as engineers, because we're technical, we feel we know how to make UIs, but I have to tell you, we're sadly mistaken most of the time. Like we can make UIs that other nerds understand and no one else does. I think we're probably reasonably good at that, and probably despite
I think most of us have read Extreme Programming 1.0, but I also read it like 5 years ago, so I have,
I made you read it as a new employee.
Yeah, it would be nice to read again, but I think most of us have read it.
Wow, but did we discuss it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, if I think that we probably have some planning to do. So that's why if we could choose a short book and then regroup about whether we want to do non-book projects and stuff like that, then that will give us an opportunity to review everything.
Right. So yeah, I'm looking at a short book. I think some UXy books are interesting. I think we could do refactoring. Some of us said that's good. There is a back to the workbook thing. So to use refactoring, because it's a good example, there is of course the classic Fowler refactoring book, which was rewritten by Jay Fields with Fowler's name is on it, but as far as I could tell, he probably just proofread it. Jay kicked it off while he was working at ThoughtWorks with Fowler, so good thing. So that would be a book that is really specific, but hopefully general. That I have Bill Wake's refactoring workbook, which is meant to be the actual hands-on companion to the other one. So it's in Java. I know Bill Wake has a refactoring Ruby book, which I suspect this is a workbook in Ruby, but I have to check that out. That's something to do. That would not be super well. I don't know. I don't know if we should do both. But anyway, the idea of an exercise, I do believe you're not really good at any of this if you haven't done a couple of them. That's just kind of fact. Just like any other endeavor. Oh, I read a book on music. Now I'm going to play. No, you're not. I watched a video on basketball, and I'm going to play. No, you're going to suck. It's true for every single endeavor, except for people go, oh, I heard about Agile. I'm good at it. I said, no, you're not. That of course, is like 60% of my interviews. Oh, I heard two guys talk about Agile. I know everything about it. Actually not true. So those are some suggestions. Anyone have any other suggestions for books besides that one? I kind of like the UX or a short Beck book. I don't think any refactoring book would be a short one. So it would be necessary, appropriate. TDD, actually, Beck's TDD book is not that short. The value in Beck's TDD book is coding. Or at least understanding it enough, because I said the first 2/3 of Beck's TDD book is him basically TDD and money. And then he goes and then he writes like an X unit from scratch TDD. He TDDs a TDD framework in Python, a little meta thing there. And that's his exercise to learn languages. He writes a test framework in it. And that's how I learned how to write a test framework in every language, because I followed along with his and go, oh, these are the things you do when you're trying to make a test framework. And that's sort of something I've gone on to go and do in like several languages myself. So, oh, it's a good exercise. And then he talks about various patterns for test-driven development. So it's a useful book. The real value is following the code. The first part might seem tedious. Like, do I have to follow the code? The strength of the first 2/3 of TDD book is, I mean, Kent Beck is like a master programmer. And if you see his process, he goes down a path and you realize it's a rabbit hole and goes another way. And so it's like, look, even the master makes mistakes, but this is how, more important, this is how he recovers. No one's perfect. Beck shows you, hey, I go here, and I did this. Oh, half a chapter. I go, do you know what? This is not the right thing. Well, how do we get out of this mess? Well, because it's TDD, I'm out of this mess. Right? Oh, but because it's duct tape, hodgepodge program, I have no idea where to start. I give up. I'm going home. Free beer time, you know. And so that's what I think is the value. But again, that's me. I don't know if this stuff is actually interesting to other people. The Python list mentioned Paul Graham's blog, which is basically hackers and painters kept up to date. Which you know, where are these essays? You know, all the essays and hacker painters were from his blog, but then they were collected whenever the book was published. I find Paul Graham a very thoughtful guy and very empowering for programmers and creative sorts. I think he's the guy that taught me, hey, those guys that said, hey, you're just an engineer, you can only do engineering stuff. I go, oh no, Paul Graham taught me, bring value and then you can do anything, like he and his company. So I found that very empowering. If that's something people are looking forward to. There was that one book I pasted, how to build habit-forming products. And I go, oh, that's probably something I would like to, you know, if I were to make a product, kind of want people to want to use it. Kind of like how I feel. What's the OS 10 presentation software?
Keynote?
Keynote, yes. Keynote. Back in the day, I mean, I think PowerPoint is much caught up, but back in the day, you made a presentation in Keynote, you just felt awesome. It's like, I freaking rock. I've made the best looking presentation in 11 minutes. You know, and PowerPoint will let you make the presentation, just not in 11 minutes and not as good looking. So it's like there's a value. There was an art that I feel Apple has lost its edge on, but once upon a time, certain Apple things were just magical. So, oh my God, especially compared to the competition at the time. So I would suggest that. Anyone have any ideas? I think a short thing, and then we can plan into maybe a deeper thing or interspersing some topics. The key thing with topics is we actually have to have someone with topics to do.
My suggestion would be, what if we do more of a book club kind of nested loop, like one day of a month where we read the entire book. We might have someone like lead the discussion, and then we all just kind of like talk to different points that we found were interesting or hard to understand, or so like that's for like maybe like a middle-sized book.
Interesting. I feel like the reason why we didn't do that is because it's a lot of content, right? But it
Yeah.
is interesting.
It's the kind of book we could probably do that to Mystical Man Monks because it's a thin book that's not technical. You really the book we just did, we could not do that.
No.
Just doesn't fit for any of our more technical programming. We could not do that.
Yeah.
Which is like here's refactoring. Guess what? Refactor. When you have smells, fix them. Okay,
Yeah.
done. Okay, well that's not useful at all. It's actually seeing the patterns and the smells and recognizing smells and then understanding there are solutions to those smells. It's like, oh, you couldn't do that. So it depends on the kind of book.
Yeah.
Like maybe Don't Make Me Think. So actually, that's something I actually think we actually want to go through the examples. So it's like, well, but it's fluffy enough that maybe we could say, well, here's the 6 patterns, really, patterns on things that are hard to understand after reading this book. So I think there are certain books that could apply for it. All depends on what we want to do. All right, someone besides Andrew and I, what book suggestions do we have for a shortish one?
I'm not sure about specific suggestions, but I do like the idea of going through more of a book at a time instead of just one chapter, as we discussed earlier.
Right. If you can find
More of a presentation format.
Then we're done. Then we have 2 weeks, and then we can do after that one. So I'm game for that. If someone's got a book that we just read and have a single, I'm good with that one where they're appropriate.
Does anyone have any Python or AI ideas?
Well, I never feel an AI book is a short book.
Right. That's true.
Right. Once we're talking length, it's
yeah. All right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. It's like I'm okay. It's like like I think UX UI books can be shorter, depending on how detailed they are. That's sort of why I picked some of the ones I posted up there look like they're shorter. I think maybe some general. Maybe we could just talk about process. Maybe we could talk about lean, various agile. And you guys know I'm an XP fan. We could talk Scrum, PDD. I think the value again. I think the reason I found Beck's book valuable, but actually I think almost every TDD book takes you through a lot of code because it's simply something you can't do if you don't exercise it. You just cannot get good at TDD if you don't literally suck at it for a while and build the muscles up to be able to do it. So, so I don't think any of those can actually be short, even if Kent Beck wrote it, who tends to write short books. Yeah, we could get less technical. So, UX, Don't Make Me Think. I wanted to do the, what's his name? What's the name of the guy? About Face, that guy's book. Everyone recommends it, but it's like 780 pages long, so I don't want to do it. Like every UX guy kind of like puts that in their book and it's like, oh, okay, no, it's too many words for what I want to say is an ever ADHD afflicted audience. 100 things every designer needs to know about people. See, that's we can move away from hard. And those are easier to read.
Was it Alan Cooper?
Yeah. About Face, Essentials of Interaction Design. Pretty much almost everyone says that's the one you should read. But Don't Make Me Think, Design Everyday Things. I hear that a lot. Evil by Design, the title looks good. UX, Lean UX, I've seen that. Don't Make Me Think. UI is Communication. Designing with the Mind in Mind. That's a title I like. Emotional Design, Why We Love or Hate Everyday Things. Well, that's by the Everyday Things guy. So that's the title. I go, oh, that's different than our normal path, but I think hopefully has a useful skill across the board, even though it's not technical because we always have to interact with people. There's one. Sharpie Art Workshop. Oh, look at that. Sharpie Art Workshop. Techniques and ideas for transforming your world. I like that title.
Of course, I want to suggest that as we go through these books, we should get like a hard copy so that we can add to the library here at the Stanford office.
Yeah. I kind of like this book. Here, I'm going to post this in the Slack, which doesn't help anyone on the. I guess I could post it on the chat. Not that anyone who's not on this group isn't someone that's on the Slack. So, okay. This book, I really like the title of this. And it's 128 pages.
Yeah, Fremont, but do you want the
Oops, 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 oops.
So, and by the way, I'm looking actually, I'll post the link of the UX recommendations from various designers that I'm looking at, that I'm pulling off of that one. And actually, ironically, the little thumbnail it puts down, third from the right, kind of looks like Alexis a little bit. Kind of like how the photo booth person looks just like Alexis. But all right, well, when I've decided now, think about it. Anyone who may be watching us off, we're going to probably do a shorter book and maybe a little less code intensive as we regroup and try to figure out a better formats, plural, for what we want to do. So if no one else has any opinions or suggestions, I'll leave it at that. And thank you for playing as I shut off the broadcast. Okay, hold on. Boom.